Hey, so today we're going to be watching the Chaos DAEMONCULABA. I hope I said that right. By Luton09. Links to the original video and channel are going to be down in the description below, so go ahead and make sure that you check him out. The people viewing this channel for the first time, just a little background on myself. I was a corporal in the United States Marine Corps, even though I got promoted like literally in the last week or so before I actually got out. I was an 0311 Marine. I was in the infantry. I was your basic rifleman, a little bit of a jack of all trades. I did 2 deployments. First one, I went to Kuwait. Really didn't do a whole lot. Just did a lot of posts. Second deployment, went back to Kuwait for about half the time worth, and then second half, actually got to go to Syria. And we also did a mission when we came back to Kuwait. It was supposed to be a 2-day mission, but it ended up being a 4-day. You know, it was like a show of force. That's just a little background on me. But to those who are coming back, just kind of a little update of what was going on. It's been kind of one of the worst past months that I've had in a while. A lot of personal stuff going on, a lot of relationship issues, a lot of things at work, and then I actually got rear-ended this past Friday when I was on my way to work, and now I'm having to deal with attorneys, talking to insurance companies and all that. So a lot of crazy things going on to the point, been quite a bit of stress. So I felt pretty good today. I was like, you know what, I want to watch more 40K, right? And as far as like keeping up with the actual lore, I have been listening to Adeptus Ridiculous, which not only is it very comedic, it also goes for a very good perspective of like someone like barely getting into the lore. Because damn, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but the guy who's like acting like as a student, right? He asked a lot of the same questions that like also like kind of came to mind for me while Brecky is explaining it. So I love that part about the show or podcast. And I was mainly trying to stick to things that like were kind of more things that I've kind of really seen a little bit. Like I saw the one where they did about the Alpha Legion. I saw the ones with the Iron Warriors, Petrabu. I can never say the name right. I learned a little bit about Angron before I stopped because I thought like, hey, I want to listen to him, like any reaction, And then, but one thing that did really stick out to me was the Chaos DAEMONCULABA. And as soon as I heard some of the stuff that he kind of briefly mentioned, I forgot which video it was. I was like, I gotta do a reaction to this because apparently there's like some of the more twisted stuff that goes on, right? I've made a second channel because I've been really wanting to get more into gaming on PC. So I released a second channel. It's gonna be called Marty The Marine, just because my last name was Martinez, and then I had a couple of people call me Marty. Just I don't know. It was a nickname that stuck, and I figured it'd be a little more appropriate instead of like Peach Butt 23. Yeah. So I'm gonna leave that link to that channel down in the description below. I'm gonna have a video up. Is some Warzone multiplayer and all that. I'm trying to get some commentary in, but I'm trying to get back in the groove of things as far as being able to talk for long periods of time on like actual video, right? Because if you've seen like the first couple of videos I've ever posted where I was talking, I sound a lot more awkward than how I would normally act, just because. All right, so without wasting too much more time, let's go ahead and get right into the video.
So for today I wanted to follow on from the last thing we covered, which was birth in the Imperium. While we could undoubtedly elaborate a little further on the other races, there is one area that cannot be ignored or forgotten. Now be forewarned as well, this is right up there as one of the absolutely most fucked up things in 40k. Some may find the descriptions enduring and unpleasant. If you're
I mean, that's really something comparing to what I've heard, like what the Drukhari do to people, right? As far as torturing them for ever so amount of time, like really horrible, nasty shit. And they're saying that this is just the worst thing I mean, I don't know if there's other things that maybe that might be comparable or at least close to maybe what happens here. Which, if I do remember, or yeah, I think I heard it at some point that this is where like Chaos Space Marines were coming out. But in any case, we'll see.
Comfortable hearing horrific details of the most abhorrent entities in the galaxy of 40k, this one might be a pass. However, that's very likely none of you. But I've said my piece, so now we can learn about the DAEMONCULABA. And of course, this relates to Chaos. And you might think to yourself, why would Chaos need birthing in the first place? Demons and their odd entities are made from warp material. Chaos Space Marines are the unholy children of the Emperor, now doomed to eternal existence within the warp unless they're crusading into real space. Their lives extended well beyond already ordinary mortality, yet still able to be obliterated from existence when facing glorious warriors of the Imperium. Chaos cultists are usually just parodies of humanity, but still human in all the ways that count, and for some of the time anyway, until things just start to get really weird. So where and who and why is birth?
Okay, wait, hold on. Before you get more into that, has anybody who's never been like a regular human, as far as like maybe an Imperial Guard, right? Like, I know that the reason why some would turn to Chaos is because to them, I think it was that they think it's better than what they currently have been dealt with life, and that they're able to actually at least get some physical power, you know, and like that. But has anybody who has ever been like, I guess, at that guardsman level or like just regular human who has been able to somehow, some way increase his power even more than what the Chaos Gods had originally gave him, right? Or just Chaos in general? And any prominent figures like in that group, or are they all just kind of like your basic foot soldier, right?
Necessary within Chaos? Well, it's complicated. And by the way, the blame of such horrors as the DAEMONCULABA lay at the feet of the failings of the Imperial Fists chapter Astartes. Worth keeping that one in mind, because this is all connected with the world of Hydra Caudatus that you will recall I covered in my recent worst defeats of the Imperium. This is in part why it was such a failing, because its post-battle consequences are beyond most mortal comprehension. You see, the issues surrounding what occurs within the Chaos Legions is complicated. For one thing, the Imperium is not especially capable of keeping track of all things the traitors are up to in their horrific non-reality. Beyond that, it's fairly specific depending on who you're talking about, and I'm going to again gloss over a few things here, but you'll get the core idea. So Chaos Marines vary in how they would have been affected by Chaos. Some have given themselves over entirely to one sect or god of Chaos. Examples of this would be the Death Guard and Nurgle, or the Thousand Sons Rubric Marines of Tzeentch, the World Eater Berserkers of Khorne, and the Slaaneshi Marines of the Emperor's Children. Now, all of these legions were affected differently, but as I haven't covered these in detail yet, this is why I say I'll gloss over it. Suffice to say though, most of you will know that Death Guard Marines are horribly bloated. They're literally walking piles of corpse flesh, disease and foul corruption. They're about as far away from a well-constructed mortal Marine as you could get. Similarly, the Rubric Marine...
Alright, so this is kind of off topic, but I did see a little bit about more on the Death Guard from Adeptus Ridiculous. And what does he call it? They call them Stinking Boys? But in any case, this is the first time I actually got like quite a bit of detail on Mortarion as well, because they actually ended up talking about him a little bit as well. And for some reason, I thought of Mortarion, and I don't know if I might be the only one who thought this, but I see green, I see Space Marine, and I was thinking like Doom Guy, and I was thinking like Doom Guy type face. But apparently, from what they were describing on there, Brecky was saying that he not the most good looking dude, right? Like he's looked incredibly pale. I mean, obviously he came from Barbarous or Barbados, something like that. That just had so much poisonous, toxic things. So you can understand why his facial features could be kind of messed up. But you know, just kind of giving you guys a heads up, like as to like little pieces that I found out from the Adeptus Ridiculous podcast.
Of the Thousand Sons, their armor is essentially sealed and all that's left inside of them is dust. They're animated by sorcerers, so again, not much is happening in terms of gene seed. But as I say, it is specific for the Rubric Marines because of their nature. They are in many ways closer to the warp, and so it's believed that if they're killed in battle and their armor is collected and resealed, then their spirits are somehow able to be relinked via rituals to guide them from the warp back to their armor. To explain this in detail, we have to rake through the history of the Thousand Sons, but the abridged version is that the Thousand Sons never had a stable gene seed to begin with. When they arrived at their new Chaos homeworld in the Eye of Terror, their mutational tendencies took hold like nothing they'd ever seen before, and in an attempt to stop this, one of their most powerful sorcerers, Ahriman, performed rituals to stop and reverse this. Unfortunately, it only partially worked. It secured and even empowered some of the competent and more powerful sorcerers, but for the rest of the less psychically familiar Marines, it all but destroyed them, sealing their armour and turning their physical selves into dust. The Thousand Sons are one of the more decimated legions and few in number because of this whole affair and for some other reasons as well. But because of this, they're far less likely to be able to easily repopulate their legion. However, it's conceivable that they could recruit new Marines by turning loyalists traitor, and then these Marines may be more stable than the Thousand Sons originally were, or Tzeentch could forcibly ravage their form too. The Thousand Sons also draw powerful psykers from other Chaos legions and amalgamate them into their ranks. They may even use cultists who show some promise, converting them into aspiring sorcerers. They're often destroyed in the process, but some will make it through to become new psychic warriors. The point is, though, that many of the Marines closely affiliated with the Chaos Gods have a difficult time acquiring new Marine stock. It's not to say that they cannot do it. Usually they will achieve the creation of new base Marines by stealing gene seed from loyalist chapters. They'll use this uncorrupted gene seed to form the new Marines before later twisting them to better fit with their new affiliations. Another occurrence can be loyalist chapters who venture into the warp, and they themselves can then discover that they have become somehow horribly mutated as the strange workings within the warp discover the flaws within their own gene seed. Such base level corruption has left multiple successor chapters facing the horrific conclusion that they have little choice to either destroy themselves or join the darkness. How much of that decision is through whispered coaxing on the winds of the warp is difficult to say. Nurgle Plague Marines, it's been said, do use their gene seed no matter how mutated, and use this to convert new prospective Marines, presumably because they are already so distorted and abhorrent beyond all imagination.
Okay, so obviously this is going to really explain. So it's going to be, it seems like it's going to be certain legions that are going to be the ones doing this, right, to give birth to more Space Marines to be able to replenish their numbers. And like you said, it's mainly to the ones who really were more aligned with the actual Chaos God and not just using like the powers of Chaos. So I also had another question also pop in my head. Do any of the legions that were traitor ever work together in some form or manner? I mean, I don't think the ones who would be closest to the gods, like one closer to Khorne and you got one closer to Tzeentch. I doubt they would get along very well because obviously the Chaos Gods hate each other. In turn, would want them to not, I guess, be buddy. But for the ones who were just using like Chaos, like just for the power, is there still any camaraderie whatsoever with any other legion? At the very least, to like have a mutual benefit to both of them or anything like that?
It makes it a little odd what they inject into the poor new aspirants. It's an uncomfortable thought to even go down the road of thinking what horrors an aspirant of the Death Guard would go through. It was bad enough before they turned to Chaos, having to drink foul poisons along with typical Space Marine testing, but to join the Nurgle Death Guard, that would be a hard pass from me. When the traitor Chaos Legions were chased into the Eye of Terror, they left behind a lot more than their honour and reputations, indeed their souls. The traitor Marine Legions had not really planned for failure. Horus's crusade had led them down a path that seemed to lead to inevitable victory, so the prospect of not being able to locate material for or creating new Marines just had not occurred to them. Now granted, the Chaos Marines retained their Legion's size, even if many of them were decimated as they fled to the Eye of Terror, and so by the end of it, they still had many thousands of Marines. But over the millennia, it's inevitable that losses would be felt. The problem facing them was how to replenish their forces, along with the fact that their gene seed had been corrupted by the warp and the gods, so producing stable new Marines was extremely problematic, if not impossible. A continuing tried and tested formula.
Okay, so it'd be like kind of like I think Bricky mentioned it in one of the podcasts that I think it was Petrabo. Fuck, I'm gonna be saying his name wrong every single time. That he was at a certain point, I think it was during the Horus Heresy, that he was trying to control demons, or like he wasn't, or something about him leading like a big part of the siege of actual Terra, and that he couldn't necessarily do the best job because he was having to work with demons, right? And the demons would just charge, right? So obviously being that unstable part. So it seems like kind of what he's saying right there as far as that. gene seed becoming more mutated, I guess, every single time, that they're probably reverting more towards demons, right? And maybe going away farther and farther from humanity. I think. I don't know.
Formula for acquiring new Marines for the Chaos Forces is still recruitment from loyalist Space Marines. While the heresy has been over 4 millennia, this does not stop bands of renegade Marines joining with the Chaos Forces. Their views on the operation of Astartes in the Imperium slowly twisted over many years. Some feel no loyalty to the Emperor or to their brothers whatsoever, and so are content to serve only their own needs. Over time, this almost inevitably leads to them turning to the darkness of chaos in one way or another. Some survive as mercenaries, but it's always a slippery slope. Lastly, sometimes the traitors succeed in stealing genetic material known as gene seed from pure loyalists. Examples of this would be the Imperial Fist's defense collapsing on Hydra Caudatus, where their stockpile of gene seed was pillaged. Chaos Marines can use this in different ways. Fabius Bile, a very famous Chaos Marine, a bizarre dark biologist and genetic engineer, is said to have unlocked the secrets of Astartes and even Primarch engineering. How much truth there is to such claims remains unsubstantiated, yet this theft of uncorrupted genetic material leads us into the segue for our main topic. For what many agree is the very worst and most abhorrent fate that exists in the 41st millennium, the DAEMONCULABA. We only get glimpses of what awaits the poor human souls captured by chaos or stranded on worlds within the Eye of Terror. Nearly always, it's nothing as serene and simple as the release of death. The DAEMONCULABA are truly horrific, but not just in the means or manner of birth, but the entire process from start to finish. Originally, they were seen in a vision by the powerful Ultramarines librarian Tigurius, which some speculate was granted to him by the Emperor, who described the bizarre creations appearing to him on a world tasting of dark iron, with womb factories of demonic flesh rippling with monstrous unnatural life. Dark morticians who would hack at these creatures with blade and saw to pull blood-soaked figures from the wombs. These were the dark mirror image of the Astartes, debased Space Marines. All Tigurius knew was that these abominations must be destroyed. Two Ultramarines, Uriel Ventris and Brother Pausanias, who had broken their faith in the Codex Astartes, were cast out by the Ultramarines and bound by a death oath to seek out the horrors on the planet of Medrengard, home of the traitor legion of the Iron Warriors, and the DAEMONCULABA, who were shuttered away in darkness, away from the sight of mankind, formed by madness and despair. Now, Chaos Marines like the Night Lords are well known to brutalise human captives to forge links to the warp through their unceasing torment. Sometimes this means literally flaying them alive, and various methods of torturous agony drawn out for as long as possible. Here on Medrengard, the Marines found similar nightmares.
Again, a little bit off topic, but I did hear the one about these guys, because I'd seen a Voldemort's video on the Night Lords. Hadn't seen one on Conrad Curse yet, but I did see a little bit of the one that Brecky did for Adeptus Ridiculous again. I'm going to be referring a lot to it, or to that podcast, just so you know. But one thing I found crazy about Conrad was that at one point, I think it was during the Horus Heresy, somebody had been captured that I think was one of Conrad's only real friends, right? So he snuck on the board of the ship of the Lionel Johnson, and I think he said several months. I'm pretty sure it wasn't more than a year. I could be wrong though, but he was literally just sneaking around his damn ship. And that he would be actively trying to find him. Couldn't find him, and he'd be like taking out Space Marines here and there. And I think they were calling him like the imposter, you know. But there's never anything small in Warhammer from what I've been remembering. Everything's always on a grand scale. Like I could imagine someone saying like, yeah, he was sneaking around the ship for like a couple of days, right? No, he did it for months.
After their journey to the planet, which I'll make an aside, did have demonic assistance in getting there, they were searching around and exploring the world they found themselves in. They discovered a raised platform. It had a grilled surface, the floor around it covered in what appeared to be scraps of flesh and fat, bodily fluids, all manner of remains. Clearly, some harrowing scene had played out here, and they soon were able to guess as to what. They noticed the wind catching huge sheets that were stretched and hooked to raised poles all around the site. These huge sheets, which took the appearance of massive sails, were made from some kind of flesh leather. Bizarre mutated humanoid creatures wearing rubber masks and round glass eye sockets were scraping, curing these strung-up leathers. But the size of these vast leather sheets led the Marines to conclude that they could at least not be human, something they were grateful for knowing. Still, the anger of witnessing such inhuman horrors led the Marines to butcher these mutant animals like the wretched, worthless things that they were, and in moments they lay cut in two, decapitated, or just burning corpse wrecks left into the ground. Yet they noted among the slaughtered remains some of the leathery skins that were being cured lay on the ground as well, and the discomfort rose in them as they saw at the top of the stripped skin hide the features of what had once been a human man, stretched to disgusting proportions. The thought of how such a form could be achieved and harvested sickened them to their core. The Marines left the site of horror burning, the promethium from their flamers incinerating the scene behind them that was so foul and offensive to the whole of humanity. The Ultramarines progressed forward on this descent of a journey down into the darkest circles of the creations of the warp, their hatred and desire for vengeance increasing constantly as they thought of the indescribable torment and agony the human individuals who ended up in such a place had to endure at the hands of such foul mutant scum. Soon they came upon another camp. This time they saw living slave humans being marched around into pens, and they appeared to be wearing or covered in baggy hanging robes that were coloured like flesh. However, the Marines soon discovered that these were not robes, but the poor captured humans were in fact naked, and that somehow they'd had the skin of their bodies stretched beyond any normal size. They carried huge folds of skin that hung from their bodies, bellies hung loosely from their ruined skeletal forms, their destination a platform similar to the one they had seen earlier, where they would undoubtedly be skinned alive. They saw that the camp was guarded by Iron Warrior traitor Marines and more of the bizarre mutant creatures. After a brief engagement aided by mysterious other Marines, the camp was secured and cleared of the traitors. The slave humans were left wailing and consoling each other as they slumped into the ground, surrounded by their vastly stretched folded skins, and they were a sad, pitiful sight to behold. The mysterious Marines who had aided them in clearing the
As far as the skin, because it seemed like he was saying that the skin was obviously stretched, but it was like still attached to them, right? And I mean, was it the skin supposed to be the largest organ that we have, if I remember right? And there's only a certain amount it can stretch, but for some reason the way I was imagining it is I was imagining, like, say from right here the forearm was stretched all the way this way. I mean, I don't know if maybe they did something so that the skin wouldn't break, because obviously your skin would have a limit as to how far it can stretch. But then again, I don't know, maybe it was something chaos related.
Site where it turned out to be renegade Marines. However, it should be said, a renegade Marine need not be corrupted by chaos, but those who are corrupted by chaos are deemed by the Imperium to also be renegades. The two Ultramarines were horrified to discover the renegade Marines had not sought to save the poor human souls that were scattered around the camp sobbing, but simply to come and destroy this place. The renegade explained to them how most humans never survived to reach this stage of skin harvesting, but the ones who did would wish they had not. They were confused as to what function such a place could serve, even to corrupted Marines. The Renegade's answer was for them to see for themselves. As they entered the darkened warehouses of the camp with its barely functioning lighting, hanging chains and mechanisms that filled the place were oiled and greased all over. Meshed cages sat atop raised platforms, each filled with a mass of flesh. Pipes and tubing fed into them from sacks hanging above. The air was thick with the stench of human waste and body fluids, and millions of tiny flies were thick as they fed upon the sickly waste. The Marines approached a cage to find something living inside that had once been a man, but to call him such now would be a horrific joke. Bloated, swollen with fat, his skin was shiny like ripened fruit, but paled like a rotting corpse. The man-thing's mouth was clamped open to allow industrial tubing feeding him directly to his stomach. Other wires and bioplugs were dotted around his chest, presumably regulating his organs to prevent him succumbing to death too soon. The limbs were barely recognisable as such as they merged into the mounds of flesh and folds of skin. His eyes were rolled and disconnected. His mind had long been since lost, its ability for rational and conscious thought gone. Other cages were much the same. Men and women held captive, tortured beyond anything the Astartes had ever witnessed before. Some were clearly in a vegetative state, but others were more traumatically clinging still to their consciousness, their eyes locked with the Marines, Even for them, it was enough to make them want to look away from imagining the horror these individuals had endured for unknown lengths of time. The women things seemed to have also undergone further punishment. Their bellies were heavily scarred, often stitched, as if they had been repeatedly suffering surgery. The Astartes, iron-willed as they were, couldn't look at this any longer, turning away from the visions that would scar their memories, doubtless for decades. They explored further, having already seen so much they needed to uncover what was going on here. More cages held human-like figures, but again, they were parodies of the human form, splayed and stretched, and these figures were hung up, and in contrast to the former, they were unfed, seemingly starving, but tubes were similarly keeping them in a state of undeath, while simultaneously sucking the fat from their bodies. The grim, dark reality of the situation became obvious to the Astartes. These humans were being forcibly fattened so that their bodies would be engorged to the point they might appear to burst, and if they didn't die from this process or the grossly disproportionate levels of fat, they'd then be vacuumed clean, leaving them in a nightmarish state of wearing a foul, hanging skin suit, then finally paraded outside in a zombie-like state of living before having it cut from their bodies and cured by the bizarre mutant horrors. The Marine...
Okay, I'm trying to picture everything he's kind of saying and the way he's describing everything, and it's there's like 2 times where I almost kind of did that little gag where I'm, and oh god, I hate my imagination sometimes. And I'm sure for those of you who already know this and kind of know what is going to happen or what has happened, listening to this again is probably making those things come back. And damn, so I know that. Okay, so we know that the Iron Warriors are there. I mean, because at least they had a couple guards, and I don't know how many there were. Ultramarines are there, and yeah.
Marines were overcome with anger, pity, and revulsion. Who or what could envisage such horrors, and to what purpose could it possibly serve? The renegade Marines were none the wiser and looked on dispassionately, only explaining that the Iron Warriors had built many camps like this. It only mattered that they seemed important to the traitors, and so this is why they sought to destroy them. And as they left this place destroying the site, the Astartes took in the scale of it. At least 24 warehouses, each a place of unending horror for those confined to its torments. They left it burning and retreated to the relative safety of the surrounding mountains of Medrengard. Later, the 2 Ultramarines would encounter the Renegade's bunker HQ. Some battle-worn Imperial Guardsmen were there, along with many other Astartes. The Guardsmen, though, would reveal that they came from, that's right, Hydra Caudatus, and it was here that, much to the horror of the Ultramarines, they discovered that the Imperial Fist's gene seed had been stored on this world, and that due to the failings of the Imperial Fist to prevent the city from being overrun by the traitors, this previous gene seed material had been stolen by the traitor warsmith Honsu, who would then proceed to bring this material, along with many thousands of Imperial slaves, here to the world of Medrengard. Uriel knew what he had to do. He would speak before the collected renegades, attempting to convince them that they should mount an all-out assault upon the fortress city of the Iron Warriors and the warsmith Honsu. He explained to them how it's clear, now that they knew of the theft of the Imperial Fist gene seed, that Honsu, via the DAEMONCULABA, sought to generate a new force of traitor marines, and that this effort must be ended before it could begin. The renegades thought such a mission would be futile and suicidal. Uriel, the former Ultramarines captain, would exclaim that he had no more of a wish to die than any of them. He was the Emperor's servant, and he wanted to live a long life so that he'd be able to continue bringing death to the enemies of mankind for as many years as he was capable. The renegades were torn between this opportunity to redeem themselves in the eyes of the Emperor and the obviously high odds that were stacked firmly against their success.
That reminds me, as soon as you said redeem themselves in the eyes of the Emperor, is it ever explained as to like kind of what they did to get like I guess to be, what do you call that when you get like, not extradited, but you get told like, hey, you're no longer welcome here, and then they send you off somewhere else. I forget what the word is, and that they get sent here. These 2 Ultramarines that they're trying to, I don't know if they do a good job here, right, or if they do what they were supposed to do, that they may be forgiven for whatever it is that they did. It doesn't. It's kind of much to speculate on it, but it doesn't seem like they did maybe a big thing that was probably bad, just because when they saw what was happening to the humans, right, they were disgusted by it and they were horrified. They couldn't believe that was going on. They were pissed. So it's good to see that at least they still would care about the, I mean, then again, these are the Ultramarines. I understand like a lot of people don't really like them for certain reasons, plot armor wise. But curiosity as to maybe what they did.
To mention that their deaths seemed a foregone conclusion. The Imperial Guardsmen were first to pledge their service before any of the renegade Astartes had the chance, but one by one they stepped up to seize the opportunity to grasp the whisper of a chance to live as they once had, and be who they knew themselves truly to be, to live for the glorious battle in the name of the Emperor and unleash furious vengeance upon those who had poisoned and destroyed this former world of humanity. As they left the bunker to travel to the city of the traitors, they may have been a ramshackle bunch of Marines and Guardsmen, but they were now singularly focused and invigorated by their goal to destroy the DAEMONCULABA, slaughter as many Iron Warriors as possible, and kill the Warsmith Honshu. They eventually would reach the fortress of Kalan Gol, where it turned out Honshu was fighting something of an internal conflict against fellow warlords of the Iron Warriors. By good fortune for the renegade Marines, a barrage split open the side of the fortress, enabling them to breach its walls, where the former captain of the Ultramarines, Uriel, would engage in close combat with Honshu and other Iron Warriors. They survived long enough to all make their way inside. The band of renegade Marines would be nearly overcome as they travelled deeper into the fortress, chaotic whispers disturbing their minds. The fortress seemed to ever encroach upon them, the deadening sky and the black sun always above them. Shadows crawled over the walls that seemed alive themselves, and they pressed ever more into the dark, claustrophobic streets of the fortress city. They searched for hours, but it was a labyrinth of streets that defied physics and reality. The band of Marines would be nearly entirely slaughtered by an Iron Warrior known as Onyx, who had been hunting them under the orders of Warsmith Honshu. He would gruesomely tear their spines clean from at least 5 of the Marines before Uriel was temporarily held by Onyx. Another Marine of his band would free him by impaling him through the throat in an attempt to kill the corrupted Chaos Marine, but to no avail. More of the renegades would die before the filth and waste of the city itself somehow became animated by the chaotic powers that gave it some semblance of life, and under these black waves of filth they were carried off deeper into Kalan Gol. After a brief interrogation with Honshu, Onyx would drag them into the bowels of Kalan Gol, where they
Okay, so this Honshu guy, he's the one, from what the picture is, he's an Imperial Guard, maybe Cadian shock trooper. I think it's because of the armor, but he said that Onyx was doing that because he was told by Honshu. Now, I've never heard of an Imperial Guard ever taking, command in that type of manner, as far as, being able to, order a Space Marine, even if it's a Chaos one, to do something, right? Because was it that they believe themselves to be, higher than a human? Although, on the Death is Ridiculous podcast, I don't remember the name of it, but I think it was in Angron's Legion. There's this one female that's supposed to be, a regular person, and apparently she shot some dude in the face who disobeyed an order. I think she told him to Karn, I think it was. I think she told him to stay on board the ship in case they got boarded. So he said, F that, I'm going to go get some glory. Did that. Turns out they did get boarded, and then as soon as he came back, she shot him in the face. It didn't do anything because he had a helmet on, I think it was. But then the Space Marines that were around her would end up protecting her, right? So this is probably the second time I've ever heard of a human, your regular human, actually telling a Space Marine what to do. Although I could be reading a little too much into it. But now it looks like we're going to get really a first person's view, sort of, right? As to what goes on in the DAEMONCULABA, whatever. That.
Counted more abominations. Figures stitched together from multiple bodies, faces and eyes replaced with rusting copper gratings who drawled as much as they spoke guttural, rasped distortions that passed for language. They descended in a cage elevator until they reached their destination, as they were to be handed into the care of the savage morticians, to be hacked, experimented upon and generally put through hellish torture. The savage morticians appeared to be bastardized versions of the Mechanicus as they scuttled around on crab-like limbs or stilted walking mechanisms. Their arms were a mixture of saws, blades, surgical instruments and any number of drills, clamps and other tools. Their bodies, if they had any at all, were ravaged with repeated surgical wounds, and the cavern was a bizarre place filled with cages similar to those in the camps they saw on the surface, where the flesh creatures, once human, were fattened then forcibly drained and skinned alive. There were many more such cages here, but the room was also awash with what appeared to be surgical tables and associated structures that lay throughout in a discarded, disorganised fashion. It was an unpleasant and foul mess. The stench of bodily fluids, blood, waste hung thick through the air. It never seemed to leave them on this world. Onyx and the Iron Warriors handed over the renegades to the savage morticians, who dragged away some of the Marines. But Uriel, it seems, was to be given over to the DAEMONCULABA. As one of the renegades cried out what was to happen with them, the barely comprehensible clicking language of these black-robed machine things replied how they were the surgeons of demise, that they would be abacinated and then opened up to be harvested for whatever purposes they saw fit, making their flesh their own. Incidentally, abacination is where someone is blinded by the process of having a red-hot piece of metal held before your eyes, or historically this was performed by also using a corrosive chemical such as slaked lime, which would be poured into cups and strapped to someone's face so that the lime would eat away at the eyes. As Uriel was dragged off to his fate, he witnessed only further horror. Stripped down humans, their flesh ruined, prisoners sewn together, others screaming in sheer incomprehensible madness as fluids were being pumped through their skulls for whatever purpose, bursting out of their eye sockets. Others were being reassembled into new forms with limbs and who knows what attached to them for seemingly no reason. If ever there was a vision of what ancient humanity had called hell, this was certainly it. He was dragged up ramps and between cages, seeing more victims that resembled those from the skin-stretching death camps. But this was not the same. Being dragged along, it was difficult to catch a clear glimpse of what was contained within these cages, until he finally saw what abominations they contained. Horribly bloated, swollen beyond all recognition, but most certainly female. The vocal cords seemingly had been cut or removed to prevent what would have been unending screaming. Unlike the forms they'd seen previously, their bellies rippled and moved. They were large enough to contain something big enough to be a full-grown human, even the size of an Astartes. In horrifying realization, Uriel understood that these were the DAEMONCULABA, and even within they held these new growing forms blended from pure, uncorrupted seed. It was the most harrowing thing Uriel had ever witnessed. All of these endless and unceasing horrors were too much. The compounding misery of fate he'd witnessed, abandonment of so many innocent humans that he'd wanted to save, but left to fates too grisly to ever tell of, the perversion of the corrupted traitors, and now this absolute unceasing nightmare, the agony, the despair, the madness. Uriel himself wept. Except he recalled his death oath, that if he succeeded, would see him restored as an Astartes. He attempted to break free from the strange surgical beast which was now cutting his armour from his body. His protesting only resulted in being bludgeoned almost unconscious, but staring down through the metal grating that was the floor, he saw conveyors filled with dead traitor Astartes who were being...
Okay, so seems like it's pretty likely it's going to be one of those where he's not going to make it. Or it doesn't seem like anyone's going to make it. And if someone does, it's probably going to be one person. But with kind of what's going on right now, does the Imperium know kind of what's going on here? I mean, if nobody makes it out, I would assume they don't. It would have to be someone that would have to come back to be able to kind of explain what's going on. And that's even if they get believed that this is what is going on here, right? Because it seems like the only people that would be sent here are probably the renegades, or maybe just depending on like whoever they just sent. So if it is the case that no one gets out, and it seems like this is more just what the reader or the person who is listening is supposed to know what is going on here. So you would know, but not the Imperium, right? It also makes me kind of wonder what the Drukhari would think of this, right? If they'd be amazed, or if they would call it like amateur hour, I guess.
Crushed and pulped into a paste-like material. Apparently this was the Iron Warriors' method to repurpose their gene seed, split with that of the Imperial Fist's stolen material, to the DAEMONCULABA as it was fed back through to them. Dragged back to his current situation, he looked around as he saw children being fed into the flesh chambers of the DAEMONCULABA, themselves struggling and crying as they'd be placed inside these hell wombs where the genetic material of the traitors would twist and corrupt them into newly formed soldiers of the Iron Warriors. Uriel was dragged into the wombs himself now, sutured into place, and he felt the warm darkness surround him. The chattering oddities of the morticians sealed him in, but not before explaining how he would die. Too old to become an Iron Warrior, gene seed will rupture your flesh. Mutant growth. Unknown results. You will be in pieces, into jars. Folds of soft blubbery flesh were covered over him, and he was trapped in a nightmare. Pulsating things shifted all around him, numbness spreading through his body. He became unconscious as he heard the friction of long threads stitching his surrounding womb shut. Meanwhile, the other renegade Marines were being clamped in place and dismembered. They learned that the skins that they'd seen being prepared on the mountains were used to clothe the newly birthed Marines of the DAEMONCULABA who were born without skin of their own. They would have this stretched flesh leather wrapped and stitched around them before becoming new Iron Warriors, and the unfleshed mutants they'd seen in the same place were the failed newborns from the process of the DAEMONCULABA. Most were reprocessed into material to be refed to the birthing monsters, but those who somehow survived struggled on, banished into the wastelands, where they scavenged like animals to survive, some employed by the Iron Warriors in the skin preparation camps. The renegade Marines cursed their abominable captors, but to no reaction or interest. Uriel by now was already struggling with his own lucid dreams confined to his living tomb. Opening his eyes up only caused them to be flooded by stinging fluids all around him. He could feel umbilicals invading his body, burrowing into him to connect with his nervous system. He was enveloped by amniotic jelly that poured into his mouth if he tried to scream, and he struggled, but his sutures held him fast, stitched to the flesh floor of this entrapment. An ever-pulsating, dizzying headache filled his mind, and his vision entirely blurred. He knew he couldn't have long before he had not enough strength to struggle, perhaps little conscious thought even. The pulsating thudding of circulation ringing in his ears, he was beginning to be unable to differentiate the sounds and feelings of his own body with that which he'd been forcibly connected with. He had to escape. He thrust upward, and somehow his hand burst through the stitching taut skin of his flesh prison. The horror of this act in and of itself was hard enough to stomach, but as he battled to be free, ripping and tearing himself from the fat, the organic threads connected to him, and the inevitable pain he must have been inflicting on his host, it was enough to make him feel a sense of madness. He pulled himself out, vomiting the jelly-like fluids that had poured into him. He was in a foul state. The air, while rancid and acrid, seemed clean and fresh to him after the claustrophobic, suffocating cell of his living incarceration. Fighting off a mutant guard who came rushing in a panic, unexpecting to see the Astartes bursting out from the DAEMONCULABA, he dodged and disarmed, killing them with ease, but only to then collapse into coughing, weeping, enraged, screaming. The entire ordeal was breaking him, but upon hearing the screams of his fellow renegade Marines, he set off to rush to their aid, for they were still suffering at the hands of their murderous captors. Uriel leapt to join in an assault already begun by his brother Ultramarine and a former Raven Guard. The bizarre morticians of the Dark Mechanicus had already been partially battered into submission. Uriel finished the job despite his blurry, weakened state of mind. While the renegade Raven Guard abandoned them to save his own life, the two Ultramarines sought to free whoever was left alive, including two severely traumatized guardsmen. Their only way out...
That Raven Guard was a dick. Dick. Okay. I also just wanted to say I love a story when there's like literally all that hope is gone. But even like, I feel like most people, even like maybe a lot of Space Marines at this point would have struggled, but probably would have maybe given up. I don't know if I'm reading too much into that, but that's sudden when you get like that little burst of energy or like that little anger, right? And then he says that he hears like his buddies screaming, right? Or he hears that they're still fighting. All right, and then gives like that a little extra edge to be able to go. Because I think he said that they cut off his arm. I think it was, or something about his arm. But I don't know. I love these type of stories. I still, considering this is Warhammer, I still don't know if they will make it out. It's always that possibility that they don't in the grim dark universe.
Out of the hellish world was through the rivers of surgical waste and pulped afterbirth, as well as the aborted Astartes, and so they waded through the tunnels flying with body parts and rotting material. They rushed in the vain hope of escape to the outside, but more bizarre mechanical morticians were after them. As the tunnel continued to descend, they soon lost their footing and were being flushed down through the fetid, stinging stream of liquid. They were swept over a colossal waterfall of disposed organics, dead-eyed half-bodies, pulped flesh, and despite fighting to escape it, Uriel was carried over the edge. Somehow they had weathered the ordeal of jagged rocks and a torrent of body parts dragging them down, but the Imperial Guard sergeant had been severely wounded and was now cradled by his colonel. Both of them by now held the respect of the Astartes, but it was a sorrowful state they found themselves in. But regardless, now was not the time for melancholy. They needed to get out of here. The Iron Warrior warsmith Honsu was more than incensed by their escape.
Iron Warriors Hansu. Did I hear that? Okay, so he was an Iron Warrior. He wasn't an Imperial Guard. Technically, it doesn't say, because he showed a picture of an Imperial Guard when he first mentioned him, right? But now I see this. I mean, unless he got corrupted by chaos and became even stronger. Although I don't know. I know it's not necessarily a big thing as far as him being actually in the Legion, being an actual Space Marine, or just being a regular Imperial Guardsman. But it's something that's just is sticking out to me. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about that for a minute. I just realized too, I had a haircut and I didn't even tell you guys, but I wanted to know a little bit more about Onyx. The fact that he just took out everybody and was able to capture them alive and actually bring them in, right? I mean, you were dealing with 2 Ultramarines, 1 Raven Guard, and the rest were Imperial Guardsmen, I believe it was. I think there was a bit more Space Marines because they mentioned about, and he showed a picture of one of them with their spine getting ripped out. So, is he a prominent figure? Or is he just someone who was just kind of there for that one moment, right? In the Iron Warriors. So far I haven't heard too many prominent figures besides, Primarch. And also one from the podcast that I don't remember his name. Hazu or something like that. And that he said something Trabo, whatever. And he ended up getting sent to a backwater planet and then was getting invaded by, I think it was Nurglings, and that they had some kind of Titan, right? But he was able to hold out for quite some time, and then when they finally did break in, he had set charges, right? And that he made everything blow up, and that the Titan fell into some Promethean thing. Whatever. I think Brecken mentioned it just being lava or gasoline or something like that, and then I think he said that he ended up dying because of the, I think it was the Night Lords. I don't remember. I don't exactly know or remember how, but I am curious as to kind of what the writers or people who were making the lore, right? Games Workshop, who did they get to think these things up? Did they think about it? Did they get other people's maybe opinion on it? Hey, think of the worst horrible things that could ever happen and then describe it in such detail we could actually picture it in your mind and kind of makes you want to gag. And also I think I mentioned it during the video as well. How does this compare to the Drukhari's version of torture, right? I mean both sides have a reason as to why they're doing it. Right here they're doing it to get more Space Marines. Drukhari so that I think it was for their own pleasure also so that they don't go to Slaanesh. So also, I know that they've kind of just escaped, right? But since there is still about 25 minutes of the video left, I don't know if they're gonna continually be chased. Uriel and the other Ultramarine and the Imperial Guards. I don't know if they're gonna be an end of game chase, maybe recaptured, or maybe they make it out and then they're able to at least tell some people within the Imperium hey, this is what's going on here. We need to shut this down. I don't even know if this thing gets shut down or if it is still operational. Hopefully I find that out later on in the actual video. But as far as that goes, I'm glad to be back here watching some videos, man. I mean, honestly, and then being able to upload some gameplay on that second channel, which, again, I'm going to be working on the commentary for that one. I'm going to leave that link down in the description below. But if you're first time viewing and you made it this far, thank you. I really do appreciate it. Like, subscribe. It really does help me out a lot. And if you're a returning viewer, thank you for having the patience to wait for me to sort out my own life and things going on there. And then being able to come back. Thank you. I really do appreciate all of you. Almost to 5,000. I never thought I'd make it past 1,000, let alone get to 5,000 subs. So it's insane. Thank you, and I will see you all on the next video.